Castle Rock formed 340 million years ago. A volcano erupted, cooled, left basalt, impermeable basalt. Water doesn't penetrate it, doesn't cool in it, doesn't flow through it. When glaciers came, they carved everything around the volcanic plug but couldn't touch the rock itself. What remained was a crag, 430 feet above sea level, cliffs on three sides, accessible only from the east where the slope gentles. Someone decided to build there, not for beauty, for control. You stand on that rock, you see everything. You control the route north, the route south, the Firth of Forth to the east. Whoever holds the rock holds Edinburgh. Whoever holds Edinburgh holds Scotland. This was understood by 600 CE when the Gododin built a hill fort on the summit. It was understood in 1093 when Malcolm III made it a royal residence. It was understood in 1296 when Edward I of England laid siege for 3 days and took it. It was understood in 1314 when Thomas Randolph led 30 men up the North Cliff at night and recaptured it. It was understood in 1440 when 2 boys were murdered there at a political dinner. It was understood in 1573 when artillery reduced David's Tower to rubble during a year-long siege. It was understood in 1558 when the first prisoners of war arrived in the vaults. By 2014, historians had documented 26 sieges in Edinburgh Castle's 1,100-year history. Not 26 battles nearby, 26 times someone attacked the castle itself, trying to take it by force or starvation or cunning. The most besieged place in Great Britain, one of the most attacked in the world. The question isn't why it was built. The question is what it cost to hold it, not in gold, in lives, in water running out in the wells, in boys executed for political expediency, in thousands of prisoners packed into vaults carved from impermeable rock, in a fortress that changed hands so many times the stones themselves absorbed the violence. Edinburgh Castle isn't a palace that hid darkness. It's a strategic position that demanded blood to maintain. If you enjoy stories about castles where location became destiny, where geology shaped history, where power required perpetual violence, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which fortress to explore next. Your support makes these deep investigations into Scotland's most complex sites possible. Thank you for being here. Let's begin with the rock itself, because before there was a castle, before there were kings, before there was Scotland, there was basalt that wouldn't accept water and wouldn't be moved. The Gododin knew what they were building on. A Celtic tribe occupying the area by 600 CE, they chose the volcanic crag for its obvious advantages. 3 sides protected by sheer cliffs, a single approach from the east, visual command of the landscape for miles. They called it Din Aiden, the Fort of Aiden. Early medieval poetry describes warriors feasting there for a year before riding to their deaths in battle. The details are sparse, the archaeology incomplete, but the principle is established. This was a military site from the beginning. In 638 CE, the Angles besieged Din Aiden. Led by Oswald of Northumbria, they took the fort. The site became known by its Anglian name, Edinburgh. The Gododin were defeated. The territory became part of Northumbria, absorbed into English control. By the 10th century, Edinburgh was reclaimed by the Kingdom of Scotland under King Indulf. The rock changed hands, not for the last time. Malcolm III made it a royal residence around 1058. His queen, Margaret, died there in November 1093 after learning her husband and eldest son had been killed fighting the English in Northumbria. She was later canonized. Her son, David I, built a chapel in her honor around 1130. St. Margaret's Chapel still stands, the oldest building in Edinburgh. 12 feet by 10 feet, stone walls, rounded arch. It survived everything that followed. David I transformed Edinburgh Castle into a seat of government. Between 1139 and 1150, he held assemblies of nobles and churchmen there, precursors to the Parliament of Scotland. Most structures from this period were timber. 2 stone buildings are documented, St. Margaret's Chapel and a church dedicated to St. Mary, which stood where the Scottish National War Memorial now sits. The castle was expanding, but so was the problem at its foundation. Basalt is impermeable. Water couldn't be drawn from the rock itself.
A well was sunk 112 feet deep, 34 meters into solid basalt, and even then the water supply often failed. During drought, the well ran dry. During siege, it ran dry faster. This would matter. In 1174, during the reign of William the Lion, the castle briefly fell to the English after William was captured. The Treaty of Falaise forced its surrender. It was returned to Scotland in 1186. The cycle was beginning. Control, loss, recapture. Edinburgh Castle was becoming the fulcrum of Scottish-English conflict. By the late 12th century, it was Scotland's chief royal fortress, headquarters for the Sheriff of Edinburgh, repository for state papers, home to the royal gun train, military troops stationed permanently, the honours of Scotland, the crown jewels, kept within its walls. Then came 1296.
Edward I of England didn't negotiate. In March 1296, he invaded Scotland and marched directly to Edinburgh Castle. His army assembled artillery on Castle Hill, trebuchets, siege engines designed to hurl massive stones against walls. The bombardment lasted 3 days. The castle surrendered. Edward installed a garrison of 325 men. He had Scottish legal records and royal treasures moved from the castle to England. He brought master builders from Wales, Thomas de Houghton, Master Walter of Hereford, craftsmen who had built his fortresses there. They reinforced Edinburgh Castle's defenses, strengthening walls, improving artillery positions. This was the first war of Scottish independence. The castle would remain under English control for 18 years. Not peacefully. Robert the Bruce and his supporters waged a guerrilla campaign. Edinburgh Castle, exposed on its rock, visible for miles, became a symbol of occupation. Taking it back wasn't optional. On March 14, 1314, Thomas Randolph, 1st Earl of Moray, nephew of Robert the Bruce, led 30 men up the north face of Castle Rock. At night, in darkness, climbing sheer cliffs. One of the garrison, William Francis, knew a route, a place where the wall could be scaled. He guided Randolph's men up the rock face. They reached the summit, surprised the garrison, killed or captured the defenders. The castle was Scottish again. Robert the Bruce immediately ordered its destruction. Slighting, it was called, the deliberate razing of a fortress to prevent its reoccupation. The walls were pulled down, the buildings demolished. Everything except St. Margaret's Chapel was reduced to rubble. 4 months later, Bruce's army won the Battle of Bannockburn. Scottish independence was secured. For a while. Edward III of England invaded in 1333, the Second War of Scottish Independence. English forces reoccupied Edinburgh Castle in 1335, rebuilding what Bruce had destroyed. They held it for 6 years. In 1341, Sir William Douglas led a covert operation. His men disguised themselves as merchants from Leith, bringing supplies to the garrison, carts of provisions, barrels of goods. The gates opened. Douglas's soldiers killed all 100 English defenders. The castle was Scottish again. This time, it stayed that way. The Wars of Independence ended with the Treaty of Berwick in 1357. David II, Robert the Bruce's son, resumed his rule and set about rebuilding Edinburgh Castle. It became his principal seat of government. David's Tower was begun around 1367, a massive structure for its time, 3 stories, over 100 feet tall, L-shaped plan. It functioned as the entrance to the castle, the barrier between attack and defense. David died at the castle in 1371 before the tower was complete. His successor, Robert II, finished it in the 1370s. The tower stood on the site where the Half Moon Battery now curves. It was connected by curtain wall to the Constable's Tower, a round structure built between 1375 and 1379 where the Portcullis Gate stands today. During this period, Crown Square was laid out over vaults in the 1430s. The southern part of the upper ward, previously unsuitable for building, was made usable by constructing a labyrinth of underground chambers, stores, armories, eventually prisons. The castle was becoming more complex, more layered, more capable of withstanding siege. Numbers make this clear. By the early 15th century, Edinburgh Castle covered approximately 7 acres. The walls reached heights of 80 feet in places. The garrison in peacetime numbered around 100 men.
During conflict, this swelled to 300 or more. The castle held Scotland's artillery, cannons, bombards, gunpowder stores. In 1384, Scotland's first recorded gun was purchased. By 1457, Mons Meg arrived, a massive bombard with a 20-inch barrel diameter, capable of firing stone balls weighing 400 pounds. It was a gift to James II from Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. James II loved artillery. He died in 1460 when a cannon called the Lion exploded next to him during the siege of Roxburgh Castle. His face was destroyed, his body shattered. He was 30 years old. But before that, when James II was 10 years old, something else happened at Edinburgh Castle, something that revealed what power actually costs in a fortress where control means everything.
November 24th, 1440. The castle's Great Hall, or possibly David's Tower. Accounts vary. A dinner was arranged. The host, 10-year-old James II of Scotland, though he didn't arrange anything. He was a child, a puppet. The real organizers, Sir William Crichton, Chancellor of Scotland and Keeper of Edinburgh Castle, and Sir Alexander Livingston, guardian of the young king. The guests, William Douglas, 6th Earl of Douglas, 16 years old, and his younger brother David, perhaps 12 or 13. The Douglas family had become too powerful. Their lands, their wealth, their military strength rivaled the crown. Crichton and Livingston saw them as a threat to their own control of the regency. The boy Earl and his brother needed to be removed. The dinner began cordially. Food, entertainment. The young king reportedly enjoyed the company of the Douglas brothers. Laughter filled the hall. Then, a black bull's head was brought in and placed before the Earl of Douglas. Under Scottish custom, this was a death symbol, a formal announcement of execution. The Douglas brothers understood immediately. James II, 10 years old, reportedly pleaded for their lives. His pleas were ignored. William and David Douglas were dragged from the table, taken outside to Castle Hill, just beyond the castle entrance. A mock trial was conducted. Charges, high treason. The evidence, manufactured. The verdict, predetermined. Both boys were beheaded in front of the young king. This became known as the Black Dinner. It inspired George R.R. Martin's Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. Martin said of it, "No matter how much I make up, there's stuff in history that's just as bad or worse." Sir Malcolm Fleming of Cumbernauld, the Douglas brothers' advisor, was also executed, though 4 days later, suggesting Livingston may have initially opposed his death only to be overruled. In 1443, Livingston formally swore an oath that he had given no counsel, assistance, or consent to Fleming's murder. He needed that oath. The Flemings were powerful, and the political situation remained volatile. The Douglas clan laid siege to Edinburgh Castle in response. They didn't take it. Crichton surrendered the castle to the king, meaning to himself and Livingston, and was rewarded with the title Lord Crichton for his loyalty. The great-uncle of the murdered boys, James Douglas, known as James the Gross, inherited the earldom and the Douglas estates. He had likely connived in the executions. Blood for land. Standard calculation. The Black Dinner didn't end the Douglas problem. They dominated the Scottish court for the next decade, filling government posts with family and supporters. When James II came of age in 1449, he found himself surrounded by Douglases. He spent his adult reign trying to break their power. In 1452, he invited William Douglas, 8th Earl of Douglas, to Stirling Castle under promise of safe conduct. There, James accused him of conspiracy and drew his dagger. He stabbed Douglas 26 times. Other nobles joined in. The Douglas body was thrown from a window. Civil war followed. The Douglas lands were eventually forfeited to the crown in 1455 after the Battle of Arkenholm. 2 dinners, 2 murders, one at Edinburgh Castle when James was 10, one at Stirling Castle when James was 22. The lesson was consistent. In a fortress built for strategic control,
Political violence wasn't an aberration, it was the mechanism.
James IV completed the Great Hall in 1511, a ceremonial space for banquets and state events. Hammer beam roof, massive oak beams supporting a ceiling designed to impress. The hall measured roughly 95 feet long by 40 feet wide. It could accommodate hundreds. James IV had little time to enjoy it. He died at the Battle of Flodden in 1513, leading Scottish forces against England. His brother-in-law, Henry VIII, had sent the English army north. James was killed on the field. His body was never properly recovered. His widow, Margaret Tudor, fled to Edinburgh Castle with their infant son, James V. The castle was hastily fortified. A town wall was built around Edinburgh. Robert Borthwick and Antoine Darce designed new artillery defenses in 1514, though little evidence suggests the work was completed. James V died in 1542 at the Battle of Solway Moss. His only legitimate child, Mary, became Queen of Scots at 6 days old. Henry VIII tried to force her marriage to his son, Edward VI, the Rough Wooing, a military campaign of invasion and destruction. Edinburgh burned in 1544, but the castle withstood the assault. Mary was sent to France at age 5. She returned to Scotland in 1561 as a widow. Her first husband, Francis II of France, had died in 1560. She married Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, in 1565. The marriage was disastrous. Darnley was jealous, possessive, alcoholic, power-hungry. Mary refused to grant him the crown matrimonial, which would have made him co-ruler. He grew resentful. On March 9, 1566, while Mary was 6 months pregnant, Darnley and a group of nobles burst into her chambers at Holyrood Palace. They dragged her secretary, David Rizzio, from the room. 56 stab wounds. He was murdered in front of her. Mary fled to Dunbar Castle, then returned to Edinburgh. But she didn't return to Holyrood. She went to Edinburgh Castle. More secure, more defensible, safer for a queen who just witnessed a murder. On June 19, 1566, in a tiny room in the royal palace, Mary gave birth to a son, James. The birth was difficult. Labor lasted hours. The room was kept dark, warm, quiet. Only the queen, a midwife, and female attendants were allowed inside. Mary clutched a holy relic of Saint Margaret, her predecessor, the saint who died in this same castle 473 years earlier. The baby was born with a caul over his face, considered a sign of good fortune. 500 bonfires were lit across Edinburgh. A royal salute was fired from the castle guns. The infant James was heir to Scotland. He would also become heir to England when Elizabeth I died childless in 1603, the union of the crowns. The Stuart dynasty would rule both kingdoms for a century. But Mary never ruled again. Darnley was found dead in February 1567. Kirk Field, a house in Edinburgh, was destroyed by a gunpowder explosion. Darnley's body was found in the garden, strangled, not killed by the blast, murdered. James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, was the chief suspect. Mary married him 3 months later. The scandal destroyed her. Protestant nobles rose against her. She was forced to abdicate in July 1567. Her son, James, became king at 13 months old. Mary fled to England, where she was imprisoned by Elizabeth I for 19 years before being executed in 1587. James VI never saw his mother again after infancy. He was raised by regents, 2 of whom died violently. He was taught to hate Mary by his tutor, George Buchanan. He grew into a wary, intellectual king who reconciled Scotland's warring factions long enough to inherit England's throne in 1603. When he moved to London, he promised to return to Scotland every 3 years. He returned once, in 1617, 14 years later. Edinburgh Castle was extensively refurbished for that visit. The royal palace was decorated. The tiny birth room where James was born was adorned with his date of birth,
1566, and the adjacent chambers were lavishly molded with coats of arms and genealogy. A gilded panel bearing the intertwined initials M.A.H., Mary and Henry, Darnley, was installed above the door in Crown Square. James stayed one night. He hosted a banquet in the Great Hall. The next day, he led a procession to Holyrood Abbey for his Scottish coronation anniversary. Then he left. He never returned. Charles I, James's son, stayed at the castle the night before his Scottish coronation in 1633. He was the last reigning monarch to sleep there. The castle's role as a royal residence was over. Its role as a military fortress was accelerating.
The 17th century brought continuous conflict. The Bishops' Wars, the English Civil War, the Jacobite risings. Edinburgh Castle was besieged, captured, recaptured, held, lost, retaken. In 1639, the Covenanters, Presbyterians opposed to Charles I's attempts to impose episcopacy on Scotland, laid siege to the castle. Alexander Leslie led the attack. He distracted the governor while his men blew up the main gate with a petard, an explosive device. The castle fell in 30 minutes. Leslie didn't lose a single man. It's described as the most efficient capture of Edinburgh Castle ever. Charles I regained the castle later that year through the Peace of Berwick. The peace lasted months. In 1640, the Covenanters took it again after a 3-month siege. The garrison ran out of supplies. The spur, an outer fortification, was badly damaged and demolished in the 1640s. In 1650, Oliver Cromwell besieged the castle during the English Civil War. His new model army had invaded Scotland. The siege lasted 3 months. The garrison held out until Christmas Eve, when they surrendered. Cromwell's forces occupied the castle. The Great Hall was converted into barracks. In 1689, after James VII was deposed in the Glorious Revolution, the Duke of Gordon, the castle's governor and a Catholic appointed by James, refused to surrender to the new Protestant monarchs, William and Mary. 7,000 troops blockaded the castle. The garrison numbered 160. Gordon held out for 3 months, refusing to fire on the town even as the besiegers inflicted little damage on the castle. He surrendered on June 14, 1689, after losing 70 men and running out of supplies. Again, supplies. Water. Food. The castle's greatest weakness wasn't its walls, it was the impermeable rock beneath them that couldn't hold water reserves. In 1715, during the Jacobite rising supporting James VIII, the Old Pretender, son of the deposed James VII, a force attempted to capture the castle. Their ladder was too short to scale the ramparts. They failed. In 1745, during the Jacobite rising supporting Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Jacobites captured Edinburgh but couldn't take the castle. The garrison bombarded the town to prevent the city's fall to the rebels. The castle held. After 1746, when the Jacobites were finally defeated at Culloden, Edinburgh Castle's role solidified. Military base, garrison, prison, arsenal. No longer a home, a weapon. New barracks were built, batteries constructed, fortifications strengthened on the north, west, and south sides. Powder magazines were added to keep gunpowder dry. The governor's house was built in the 18th century. And the vaults, those chambers beneath Crown Square created in the 1430s, were repurposed for prisoners of war. The first prisoners arrived in 1758, French privateers captured at the start of the 7 Years' War. The crew of the Chevalier Bart. They were held in the vaults below Crown Square, chambers carved from the volcanic rock, accessible only by narrow stairs. Between 1757 and 1814, over 1,000 prisoners were held there. French, American, Spanish, Dutch, Irish, Italian, Danish, Polish. Sailors, mostly. Many Americans captured during the War of Independence. An early depiction of the Stars and Stripes flag is scratched into one of the vault doors. The conditions were documented. John Howard, a prison reformer, visited in 1779.
He described the vaults as, for the most part, miserable holes, fit only for the reception of the worst malefactors, dark, long, and narrow, capable of admitting but little light and air. Numbers clarify. Each prisoner was allocated approximately 1 square meter of space. 1,000 men crammed into vaults designed for storage. Hammocks hung from the ceiling. Fireplaces were installed for warmth, but the rock held cold. Vents were cut for air circulation, but the chambers remained stuffy. Separate latrines were built, but sanitation was primitive. The youngest prisoner was 6 years old, a drummer boy captured at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. He was still being held 6 years later. Many died. Disease, mainly. Typhus, dysentery, pneumonia. Some from injuries sustained before capture. The French man-of-war Marquis de Lafayette was sunk in the West Indies. Its crew endured a 14-week voyage across the Atlantic in appalling conditions before reaching Leith. An Edinburgh newspaper described their arrival as a scene of such misery and wretchedness as has never before been seen in this country. 140 men, starving, sick, marched up to the castle and locked in the vaults. Escape attempts were frequent. In 1811, 49 prisoners broke through a hole in the defenses, still visible today. They climbed down Castle Rock. All but one made it safely to the bottom. All were recaptured. One prisoner tried hiding in a dung cart, hoping to be carried out down the Royal Mile. The cart was dumped over the castle wall onto the rocks below. His neck was broken. He died instantly. His ghost, according to castle staff and visitors, still lingers. Reports describe a figure accompanied by a strong smell of dung, sometimes attempting to push people from the battlements. To alleviate boredom and earn money, prisoners made and sold craft items, bones, straw, wood, any materials they could find. They carved model ships, chess sets, boxes, board games. Between 10 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. daily, they were allowed to sell these items to the public. A few survive. A model of HMS St. George, sold to the Duke of Atholl for £5, 4 shillings and 6pence, is now in Historic Environment Scotland's collection. Remarkably detailed. Hull, rigging, sails. Made by men imprisoned in a vault. Graffiti remains on the walls. Names, dates, marks. Prisoners scratching evidence of their existence into rock that wouldn't hold water but would hold their desperation. The vaults stopped being used as prisons in 1814, after the Napoleonic Wars ended. They were repurposed again. Storage, kitchens, a bakery. By the 20th century, they were largely forgotten. Today, they're a museum exhibit, a recreation of how the vaults looked around 1800. Mannequins in period clothing, hammocks, fireplaces, explanatory plaques. 1.5 million tourists visit the castle annually. Many descend into the vaults. Many leave quickly. The 19th century brought new construction. The new barracks, completed in 1799, housed up to 600 troops during the Napoleonic Wars. They're still used by the military today. A military prison was built in 1842 for soldiers from the local garrison. Solitary confinement. 12 cells initially, expanded to 16 with separate ablution facilities, a miniature version of civilian prisons elsewhere. The castle's function as a garrison continued. During the 7 Years' War, American War of Independence, Napoleonic Wars, British military forces used Edinburgh Castle as a base. Soldiers trained there. Weapons were stored there. Prisoners, military prisoners, not prisoners of war, were disciplined there. In 1916, during World War I, 2 German Zeppelins dropped 24 bombs on Edinburgh. Many buildings were destroyed or damaged. The castle was unharmed. Its guns fired at the Zeppelins but missed. The 1 o'clock gun, a time signal fired daily from Mills Mount Battery since 1861, was fired once in self-defense during that raid, the only time. During World War II, the honors of Scotland, the crown, scepter, sword of state, were hidden in David's Tower, buried in a medieval latrine closet, protection from potential German invasion. They remained there until the war ended. The National War Museum was established in 1933, honoring Scottish soldiers who died in World War I. It stands on the site of St. Mary's Church, demolished centuries earlier. The National War Museum was established in 1933, displaying Scotland's military heritage, weapons, uniforms, documents. By the mid-20th century, the castle's active military role was diminishing, but it never stopped entirely. The British Army still maintains a presence. Barracks are still occupied. The castle is still technically an active military base. But its primary function now is different. Tourist attraction.
1.5 million people visit Edinburgh Castle annually. It's Scotland's most popular paid tourist attraction. The old and new towns of Edinburgh, including the castle, are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors climb Castle Hill from the Royal Mile. They pass through the Portcullis Gate, built in the 1570s after the Lang siege destroyed the original entrance. They walk across the Esplanade, where the Edinburgh military tattoo is performed each August. They enter the castle grounds. St. Margaret's Chapel, the Great Hall, the Royal Palace, Crown Square in the room containing the honours of Scotland, Mons Meg on display near the chapel, the 1 o'clock gun demonstration, the National War Memorial, the National War Museum, the Prisons of War exhibit in the vaults, guided tours, audio guides, educational programs for schools, wedding ceremonies in St. Margaret's Chapel, the castle as event space. The ticket price, roughly £20 for adults, £15 for seniors, £11 for children. Over £30 million in annual revenue. Managed by Historic Environment Scotland, owned by Scottish ministers and the UK Ministry of Defence. The military presence remains. The Governor of Edinburgh Castle, currently Major General Alastair Bruce of Creanock, oversees the site. Soldiers are stationed in the new barracks. Ceremonies are held. The 1 o'clock gun is fired every day except Sundays, Good Friday, and Christmas. Tradition from 1861, originally a time signal for ships in the Firth of Forth. Everything is preserved, everything is interpreted, everything is accessible. Except the context. The castle looks peaceful from the esplanade. Stone walls, battlements, flags flying. The view extends across Edinburgh, over the Firth of Forth to Fife. On clear days, the landscape stretches for miles. Beautiful. What isn't visible? The 26 sieges, the water running out, the bodies on Castle Hill after the Black Dinner, the prisoners packed into vaults, the artillery bombardments that reduced David's Tower to rubble, the strategic calculations that made this rock worth thousands of deaths. The castle's architecture tells part of the story. St. Margaret's Chapel survived because Robert the Bruce spared it in 1314. Everything else from that period is gone. David's Tower, built in the 1770s, was destroyed in 1573 and buried inside the Half Moon Battery. The Great Hall, completed in 1511, was converted to barracks by Cromwell in 1650 and only restored in the 19th century. The Royal Palace bears gilded initials MAH for Mary and Darnley, but Mary lived there for weeks, not years. The honours of Scotland are displayed in climate-controlled cases, but they were hidden in a latrine during World War II. Every building has layers. Every stone has been repaired, replaced, rebuilt. The castle visitors see is mostly 16th century and later. The medieval fortress exists in fragments, a chapel, a vault, ruins entombed in later construction. The vaults beneath Crown Square are the exception. They're original 1430s construction, carved from rock, unaltered except for what humans did inside them. A recent paranormal investigation in the vaults documented anomalies, temperature drops, electromagnetic fluctuations, reports of voices, footsteps, figures. Construction workers in 2002 to 2003 refused to work in the Queen Anne Tower alone, claiming harassment by unseen presences. Whether these are spirits of Napoleonic prisoners or psychological responses to oppressive architecture is debatable. What isn't debatable, the vaults were designed to hold humans in minimal space, in darkness, in cold for years.
They succeeded. The Lang Siege of 1573 is worth detailed examination. It lasted 2 years. It destroyed most of the medieval castle. It revealed, again, the cost of strategic position. Mary, Queen of Scots, had been forced to abdicate in 1567. Her infant son, James VI, was king. Scotland split between supporters of Mary and supporters of James. Sir William Kirkcaldy of Grange, governor of Edinburgh Castle, declared for Mary. He held the castle in her name. The regent's forces besieged the castle beginning in May 1571. Kirkcaldy's garrison numbered perhaps 150 men. The besiegers numbered in the thousands, but they couldn't take the castle. It was too strong, the walls too thick, the position too elevated. The siege continued for months. Skirmishes, artillery exchanges, stalemate. By 1573, England intervened. Elizabeth I, supporting the Protestant faction backing James VI, sent troops and artillery. English siege guns were assembled on Castle Hill, facing the east walls. 5 other batteries were positioned north, west, and south. On May 17, 1573, the bombardment began. Over 12 days, approximately 3,000 cannon shots hit the castle. Stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds, iron shot, explosive shells. On May 22, the south wall of David's Tower collapsed. The next day, the Constable's Tower fell. Debris blocked the castle entrance and the fore well. The well had already run dry. On May 26th, the spur, the outer fortification, was captured after being isolated by the collapse. Kirkcaldy attempted negotiations. He offered to surrender if he and his men could go free. The offer was rejected. He would be executed for treason. He knew it. He tried to continue the resistance. His garrison threatened mutiny. No water, no supplies, walls collapsing. Kirkcaldy surrendered on May 29, 1573. He was hanged in Edinburgh on August 3, 1573. His body was displayed on the toll booth. His property was forfeited. The castle was in ruins. David's Tower, over 100 feet tall, the entrance and heart of the fortress, was destroyed. The Constable's Tower was gone. The walls were breached. Reconstruction began immediately. The Half Moon Battery was built around the ruins of David's Tower, entombing what remained. The Portcullis Gate replaced the Constable's Tower. By 1578, the castle was functional again. But the lesson was recorded. Artillery had made medieval fortifications obsolete. Thick walls could be breached. Tall towers could be toppled. The strategic advantage of height was offset by vulnerability to cannon fire. Edinburgh Castle endured because it was rebuilt, because resources were allocated, because control of that rock remained essential, not because it was invincible. The Black Dinner remains the castle's most infamous event. Not the bloodiest, not the most strategically significant, but the most emblematic of what the castle represented. Power maintained through calculated violence. William Douglas, 6th Earl of Douglas, inherited his title at 15. His father, Archibald Douglas, 5th Earl, had died in 1439. William became one of Scotland's most powerful nobles at an age when most boys are still learning Latin. His estates sprawled across southern Scotland, Galloway, Annandale, the borders. His income exceeded the crown's. His retinue numbered in the hundreds. His influence was substantial. Sir William Crichton and Sir Alexander Livingston, controlling the regency for 10-year-old James II, viewed the young earl as a threat. If the Douglases consolidated power during the king's minority, they could dominate Scotland for decades. The invitation to Edinburgh Castle was framed as hospitality. The boy king wanted to meet the young earl, a friendly gesture, a royal welcome. November 24, 1440. The Great Hall, or David's Tower. Dinner served. Young James reportedly liked the Douglas brothers. He was a child. He saw other children. Companionship. The Black Bull's Head arrived. Silence. The Douglas brothers understood. James did not. Sir Malcolm Fleming reportedly stood, preparing to draw his sword. He was restrained, disarmed. William and David Douglas were dragged from the hall to Castle Hill, the area where the esplanade now stands. A crowd assembled, a makeshift court convened, charges read, verdict predetermined. Both boys were beheaded. Contemporary accounts don't record whether they were allowed final words. They weren't allowed defense. James II witnessed the executions or was told immediately. He wept. He pleaded. He was ignored. A king in name, powerless in fact. Sir Malcolm Fleming was imprisoned. He was executed 4 days later on November 28, 1440, allegedly hanged, drawn, and quartered, though some sources say he was simply beheaded. The brutality was the point, a message to the Flemings: do not ally with Douglas against the Regency. The Black Dinner didn't end the Douglas threat. James Douglas, James the Gross, became the 7th Earl. He governed the Douglas estates and aligned with the Regency. His son, William Douglas, 8th Earl, rebuilt Douglas power. By the late 1440s, the family dominated Scottish politics again. James II waited until he had authority. In 1452, at Stirling Castle, he murdered William Douglas personally. 26 stab wounds, the final break with the family that had overshadowed his childhood. The Black Dinner was political expediency. 2 boys killed to prevent future threats. A fortress used to host murder under the guise of hospitality. It worked. The Douglases were weakened. The Regency maintained control. James II eventually broke their power entirely. Cost? 2 lives. Teenage boys, executed for being born into the wrong family at the wrong time.
The castle's water problem recurred in almost every siege. The Forwell, sunk 112 feet into basalt, was the primary source. Secondary wells existed but were less reliable. During drought or prolonged siege, the wells ran dry. In 1341, when Sir William Douglas recaptured the castle, the English garrison had been rationing water for weeks. In 1573, during the Lang siege, the Forwell was blocked by debris from the collapse of David's Tower. Kirkcaldy's men had no water. Surrender was inevitable. In 1689, the Duke of Gordon held out for 3 months. Food ran low, water ran lower. His surrender was strategic but also practical. His garrison was dying of thirst. The geology was insurmountable. Basalt doesn't hold water. Wells had to penetrate deep, through solid rock, to reach the water table. Even then, the supply was limited. During normal times, a garrison of 100 men could be sustained. During siege, when stress increased consumption and resupply was impossible, the well couldn't keep up. Efforts were made to address this. Additional wells were sunk in the 17th century. Cisterns were built to collect rainwater. Storage capacity was increased. But the rock remained impermeable. The problem persisted. Modern Edinburgh Castle has running water from the city's supply. The Forwell is preserved as a historical feature. Visitors can see it, a deep shaft, stone-lined, descending into darkness. Explanatory plaques describe its function and depth. What isn't explained, the desperation of watching that well run dry. The calculations made during siege, days of water remaining versus days until relief. The knowledge that surrender meant execution or imprisonment, but staying meant dehydration. Thirst determined the castle's fate more often than artillery. Mons Meg, the massive bombard, arrived in 1457, a gift to James II from Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. Forged in Mons, Belgium, by master gunsmith Jehan Cambier. Specifications: 13,000 pounds. Barrel length 13 feet. Bore diameter 20 inches. Capable of firing stone balls weighing 400 pounds. Range approximately 2 miles. Crew required between 6 and 12 men, depending on the operation. It was transported to Edinburgh in pieces, then assembled at the castle. It was used in sieges.
Thrieve Castle in 1455, Norham Castle in 1497, Dumbarton Castle in 1489. In 1558, Mons Meg burst, a gun salute in honor of Mary of Guise, Mary Queen of Scots' mother and regent of Scotland. The barrel split. The weapon was irreparably damaged. It remained at the castle, non-functional. In 1754, it was removed to the Tower of London as a curiosity. Sir Walter Scott campaigned for its return. It came back to Edinburgh in 1829, paraded through the streets to cheering crowds. It now sits on a platform near St. Margaret's Chapel. Tourists photograph it. Children climb on it when guards aren't looking. It's an icon, a symbol of Scottish military heritage. It's also evidence of arms race logic. Mons Meg was obsolete within decades of its arrival. Lighter, more mobile artillery replaced massive bombards. By the 16th century, field guns were more effective. Mons Meg was a relic long before it burst. But its presence mattered. A castle that owned Mons Meg was a castle that could destroy walls. A kingdom that owned Mons Meg could project power. Until the barrel split. Then it was just a very heavy piece of broken metal.
The honors of Scotland, the crown, scepter, and sword of state, are kept in the Crown Room, the oldest crown jewels in the British Isles, older than England's, which were melted down during the English Civil War. The crown was made for James V in 1540, though it incorporates elements from earlier crowns dating to the 14th century. Gold, Scottish pearls, gemstones. The scepter was a gift from Pope Alexander VI to James IV in 1494. Silver gilt, rock crystal, pearls. The sword was a gift from Pope Julius II to James IV in 1507. Steel blade, silver gilt hilt, etched with figures of Saints Peter and Paul. These objects crowned Scottish monarchs. Charles II was the last, crowned at Scone in 1651. After the Union of the Crowns in 1603 and the Union of Parliaments in 1707, the honors became symbolic rather than functional. They were locked in a chest in the Crown Room in 1707 and forgotten. In 1818, Sir Walter Scott led a search. The chest was opened. The honors were intact. During World War II, they were buried in a latrine closet in David's Tower, safety from German bombing. They were recovered in 1945, undamaged. They're now displayed in glass cases, climate-controlled, guarded. Visitors queue to see them. The line often extends down the stairs out into Crown Square. People wait 30 minutes to view objects behind glass for 60 seconds. The honors symbolize Scottish sovereignty. They survived when Scotland's independence did not. They endured when the kingdom merged into Great Britain. They're also just objects, metal, stone, crafted by humans for humans to signify power that was always temporary. Edinburgh Castle has been called the most haunted castle in Britain. Paranormal investigators have documented over 30 distinct phenomena: figures in 17th century dress, phantom pipers, ghostly dogs, temperature anomalies, electromagnetic disturbances. The most famous story involves a piper, sent into a tunnel beneath the Royal Mile to map its extent. He played bagpipes as he walked, so his progress could be tracked from above. Halfway down the Royal Mile, the music stopped. The piper was never seen again. His ghost allegedly still plays in the tunnels. Another account, a headless drummer, seen before misfortune befalls the castle. He appeared before Cromwell's siege, before the Jacobite Rising, before World War I. A colonial prisoner from the American Revolutionary War haunts the vaults, attempting to escape forever. The dog cemetery contains small graves, dogs that belonged to soldiers stationed at the castle. One, a terrier, is said to haunt St. Margaret's Chapel. Whether these accounts are legitimate paranormal activity, folklore, psychological suggestion, or tourism marketing is debatable.
Historic Environment Scotland doesn't officially endorse ghost tours, but they don't discourage them either. Third-party companies run nighttime paranormal investigations at the castle. They're popular. What's documented? People report experiences, cold spots, unexplained sounds, feelings of being watched. These reports are consistent across decades, from different visitors, under varied conditions. What's also documented, the castle has been a site of violence, imprisonment, death, and desperation for over 1,000 years. If stone could absorb trauma, these stones would be saturated. The ghosts, real or imagined, aren't the point. The point is what they represent. The insistence that the past isn't past, that the violence committed here left marks, that tourism and interpretation can't erase what happened.
The military tattoo, performed on the Esplanade every August since 1950, attracts over 200,000 spectators annually. Massed military bands, dancers, performers from around the world, fireworks, lights, precision marching. The event is spectacular. The backdrop is the castle's illuminated facade. The sound echoes off the stone. The pageantry is carefully choreographed. It's also a performance of military power, national anthems, uniforms, discipline, tradition. The castle provides the setting, a fortress celebrating the institutions that made it necessary. The contradiction is unacknowledged. The tattoo doesn't mention the 26 sieges. It doesn't reference the prisoners in the vaults. It doesn't discuss the Black Dinner. It presents military tradition as glorious heritage divorced from context. This is common at heritage sites. Selective memory. Emphasize craftsmanship, architecture, ceremony. Minimize violence, exploitation, desperation. Edinburgh Castle's interpretation has improved. The Prisons of War exhibit in the vaults is honest about conditions. The National War Museum addresses the costs of war, not just the victories. Informational plaques throughout the site include uncomfortable facts. But the emphasis remains on spectacle. The Honours of Scotland, Mons Meg, St. Margaret's Chapel, the 1 o'clock gun, the view. The fundamental question, what did it cost to hold this rock for 1,000 years, is present but secondary. The answer, thousands of lives. Boys executed for political expedience, prisoners dying of disease in vaults, soldiers killed in 26 sieges, civilians caught in bombardments when the castle shelled the town, workers who built the walls, dug the wells, hauled the stone. The castle stands because those people died. It endures because their sacrifices are forgotten. The rock remains, 340 million years old. Basalt, formed in volcanic heat, shaped by glaciers, impermeable and enduring. Everything built on it has changed. Medieval timber structures burned or rotted. Stone buildings were destroyed in sieges. David's Tower collapsed and was entombed. The Constable's Tower fell. St. Mary's Church was demolished. Only St. Margaret's Chapel survived intact. What visitors see is mostly 16th to 19th century construction, rebuilt, restored, repaired. The castle is less a medieval fortress than a palimpsest of successive fortifications, each responding to new technologies, new conflicts, new purposes. The current castle is a museum, military base, tourist attraction, event venue, and symbol. It serves Scotland's heritage industry, the British Army, Historic Environment Scotland, and the city's tourism economy. 1.5 million people visit annually. They pay admission, take photographs, buy souvenirs. The castle generates revenue. It employs hundreds. It anchors Edinburgh's identity. But it's also honest if you look closely. The vaults are preserved as they were. The Honours of Scotland are displayed with their full history. The National War Museum doesn't sanitize war. The plaques acknowledge the sieges, the prisoners, the violence. The question is whether that honesty matters when the overall experience remains celebratory, when the tattoo glorifies military tradition, when the 1 o'clock gun fires as entertainment, when the rock itself is a postcard backdrop.
The castle offers two truths simultaneously. It was a site of strategic necessity where power required perpetual violence, and it's a beautiful structure, architecturally significant, historically invaluable. Both truths exist. Neither cancels the other.
The volcanic rack cooled 340 million years ago. It withstood glaciers. It supported 1,000 years of human construction. It absorbed 26 sieges, countless deaths, layers of blood and ambition. The rock doesn't care. It's basalt, impermeable, indifferent. But the humans who built on it cared. They cared about control, about Scotland, about power, about survival. They built walls, dug wells, stationed troops, imprisoned enemies, executed boys, crowned kings, buried treasures, fired guns. They made the rock mean something. Edinburgh Castle isn't neutral. It's a fortress that required violence to hold, a strategic position that guaranteed conflict, a place where geology shaped history, where location became destiny. The tourists climbing Castle Hill today don't see the water running out in the wells during the Lang siege. They don't see the Douglas brothers dragged at execution after the Black Dinner. They don't see the prisoners scratching names into vault walls. They don't see the artillery reducing David's tower to rubble. They see a castle, beautiful, historic, dramatic against the sky. Both versions are real. The castle that demanded blood, the castle that inspires awe. The rock holds both, impermeable, enduring, waiting for the next 1,000 years of humans to decide what it means. The question isn't whether Edinburgh Castle is dark. The question is whether its darkness can coexist with its beauty, whether a fortress built for violence can be celebrated for architecture, whether a site of suffering can be a symbol of pride. The rock doesn't answer. It just stands, 430 feet above sea level. Cliffs on 3 sides, accessible only from the east, exactly as it's always been.